The calm of the Galactic Empire was shattered in an instant. For centuries, the Empire had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, its mighty fleet and advanced technology feared by all. It seemed nothing could threaten their dominance. But today, something was different. It started with a strange signal, intercepted by Empire sensors. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a minor issue that could be ignored. But as the seconds ticked by, the signal became stronger, clearer. It was a distress call, one that came from an unknown source deep within the Empire's borders. General Kale, a seasoned officer in the Imperial fleet, was the first to notice the unusual readings on his screen. His eyes narrowed as he studied the data. "This isn't right," he muttered to himself. The signal was coming from a small, seemingly insignificant system, one that wasn't even listed on the Empire's star charts. It was as if someone was hiding in plain sight. The general immediately ordered his fleet to prepare for immediate action. The Empire's technology was second to none, and no enemy had ever been able to challenge it. But something in the back of Cal's mind told him that this was different. This wasn't some rogue pirate or rebellious colony. This felt like an organized force, and it was coming for them. Within moments, a fleet of Empire ships arrived at the coordinates. They were massive, imposing warships that struck fear into anyone who saw them. Their sleek, black designs shimmered in the void of space, ready for battle. But what they found waiting for them was not what they expected. The first signs of trouble came when their sensors failed. The ship's powerful scanning equipment, usually able to detect the smallest of objects in space, now showed nothing. The enemy ships had somehow managed to hide their presence. They were invisible. For the first time in history, the Empire's military was blind. General Cal's hand gripped the arm of his command chair. "What's going on?" he barked, turning to his officers. The confusion in the room was palpable. The fleet's elite officers were used to being in control, but now they were struggling to understand what was happening. Then, without warning, a single shot fired from the darkness. It struck one of the Empire's flagship warships, sending it spiraling into chaos. The blast was sudden and powerful, and it sent shockwaves through the fleet. General Cal's eyes widened. "Return fire," he shouted, but it was too late. Before his orders could even be acted upon, more blasts rained down from the unknown enemy. The Empire's ships were now under heavy fire. Their shields, usually impenetrable, flickered and weakened under the onslaught. The strange enemy ships appeared out of nowhere, moving faster than anything the Empire had ever seen. They were sleek, almost ghostly in their movements, and their weapons tore through the Imperial fleet with terrifying precision. "Who are they?" General Kale asked, his voice filled with disbelief. He had fought in dozens of battles, faced countless enemies, but never had he seen anything like this. The Empire's warships, usually the kings of the battlefield, were now helpless. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice crackling over the communication system. It was one of his fleet commanders. "General, there's something you need to know. Their main fleet hasn't even entered the battlefield yet." Cal's heart skipped a beat. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. If this small enemy force was already causing so much destruction, what would happen when their full fleet arrived? The thought was almost too much to comprehend. The battle raged on, but the Empire's forces were beginning to panic. The commanders, usually calm and confident, now struggled to make sense of what was happening. They had always been prepared for any threat, but this enemy was like nothing they had ever encountered. It was as if the rules of war had been rewritten. One by one, the Empire's ships were falling. The unknown enemy was precise, their strikes clean and devastating. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a cold, calculated attack. And still, the Empire's main fleet had not even arrived. As the battle continued, General Kale realized the magnitude of the situation. The Empire's power, its pride, was slipping away. The unthinkable was happening. The once mighty fleet was on the verge of being destroyed, and no one knew how to stop it. "Stay focused," Cale ordered, though even he could feel the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "We'll find a way to fight back. We always do." But deep down, he knew that this was unlike any battle he had ever fought before. The Empire was in shock. They had underestimated their enemy, and now they were paying the price. The question on everyone's mind was the same. Who were these attackers, and what did they want? As the minutes passed, the Empire's military was losing ground, and the true scale of the threat began to sink in. This was just the beginning. The real battle hadn't even started yet, and already the Empire was struggling to survive. The Empire's fleet, once confident in its strength, now found itself struggling against an unseen enemy. Despite their advanced technologies and the best military minds at their disposal, they were losing. What made it worse was the mystery surrounding their attackers. Every second that passed only deepened the uncertainty. The Empire had faced many enemies, but this was different. These attackers had come from nowhere, with a power they couldn't comprehend. The officers on the command deck were in disarray. Lieutenant Zara, an expert in tactics, stared at the communication screen, her brow furrowed. "General, the enemy ships, they seem to vanish into thin air. One moment they're there, the next they're gone," she reported, her voice tight with confusion. General Cale paced back and forth, his mind racing. This wasn't just about superior weaponry or better strategy. The enemy was using something far more mysterious. Whatever it was effective. "Can we track them?" he demanded. Zara shook her head. "Not at all. They seem to be using some kind of advanced cloaking technology. Our sensors are useless against it." The fleet's main communication system buzzed with a new message, one that brought a sinking feeling to Cal's stomach. It was a direct communication from the enemy. A calm voice, almost too calm, spoke over the encrypted channel. "You are outmatched. Your technology is outdated. You stand no chance, General. But we will offer you a choice. Retreat, and we will spare you." Cale felt his jaw tighten. Retreat? From who? He muttered. Who were these people? They spoke with such confidence, as if victory was already certain. It was a chilling thought. The unknown enemy seemed to know everything about the Empire, its strengths and weaknesses. They were playing a game, one where the Empire was already losing, and it wasn't clear how the rules were being made. Cale felt as though the very fabric of the battle had changed, with the Empire's might being torn apart piece by piece. The voice from the enemy continued, as if reading Cale's thoughts. "The fleet you face is nothing more than a distraction. The true force is still on its way. What you see now is but a fraction of our power. Do not think your forces will save you. You have been warned." General Cale stared at the screen in silence. Every officer on the bridge exchanged nervous glances, the weight of the situation sinking in. The words echoed in their minds. The true force is still on its way. The realization hit them hard. This wasn't just about winning a battle. The enemy had no intention of stopping here. They were aiming for something much bigger. "We need to regroup," Cale said, his voice grim. "Order all ships to fall back. We'll try to salvage what we can and rethink our strategy." But even as he gave the orders, doubt crept into his mind. Could they really fight back? What if this enemy was beyond anything they had ever faced? The Empire had always prided itself on being the most powerful force in the galaxy, but now it seemed that their power was no match for what they were up against. The battle continued, but it was clear that the Empire was losing. Their ships were disoriented, their weapons ineffective against the enemy's advanced technology. As the mysterious attackers pulled back, leaving the Empire fleet in shambles, the tension in the air grew thick. They had come so close to defeating them, and yet this was just the beginning. General Cale's mind raced as he tried to form a plan. The enemy had only shown a glimpse of their full power. It was enough to make him realize that the true battle was yet to come. But one question lingered. Who were these attackers, and how did they know so much about the Empire? The situation was becoming more urgent with each passing moment. The Empire had underestimated their foes, and now they had to deal with the consequences. What would happen when the full strength of this mysterious enemy finally arrived? As the Empire's fleet regrouped and tried to make sense of the chaos, General Kell couldn't help but feel the weight of the decisions ahead. The game had changed, and it wasn't clear whether the Empire could adapt in time. As the days passed, the Empire's leaders tried to regain their composure, but the unsettling feeling that something much greater was coming began to spread. The reports from the front lines were grim, and whispers of fear echoed through the corridors of the Empire's command centers. The mysterious enemy had already struck a blow, but they had not revealed their full hand. General Kell was in a constant state of unease. Despite all their strength, all their technology, they couldn't stop what was happening. He sat in his office, studying the data sent from the fleet. A message flickered on his screen, a transmission from one of his most trusted officers, Commander Lyra. "We've discovered something, sir," Lyra's message read. "It seems the enemy is using a type of energy we've never seen before. Our scanners can't pick it up, but it's there, just beneath the surface." General Kell leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of energy?" Lyra's response came quickly. "It's like nothing we've encountered. It's both invisible and incredibly powerful. We suspect it's powering their cloaking technology, but it could also be the source of their weaponry." The general's heart skipped a beat. If their enemy had access to energy that could bypass the Empire's advanced technology, it would explain why their attacks had been so effective. But this was a troubling discovery. If the enemy had such a resource, it was only a matter of time before they would have the upper hand in any battle. The Empire's fleet would be unable to stop them. "We need to find out more," Kell muttered to himself. He immediately sent a message to Lyra, instructing her to gather any information she could about this energy and any weaknesses it might have. The stakes were higher now, and they couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. In the meantime, Kell gathered his top officers in a war room to discuss their next steps. Everyone seemed tense, unsure of how to proceed. Lieutenant Zara spoke first. "General, we've been able to trace some unusual patterns near the enemy's last known position. They're moving in a way that suggests they're preparing something, but we can't figure out what." "I don't like this," Kell said, rubbing his temples. "We're always one step behind. Every time we think we're closing in, they'd vanish again. If we're going to survive this, we need to understand how they think." Zara nodded. "We've analyzed their previous attacks. It's like they're testing us, probing for weaknesses, but it's more than that. There's a pattern in their movements, almost like they're leading us somewhere." "Leading us?" Kell's eyebrows raised. "Where?" "We don't know yet," Zara replied, "but it's becoming clear that they're trying to manipulate our responses. Every time we react to one of their moves, they adjust. It's as though they know what we're going to do before we even do it." The general sat back in his chair, his mind racing. It was as if their enemies were always one step ahead, anticipating their every move. This was no ordinary force. This was a well-organized, intelligent group with knowledge of the Empire's tactics, its systems, and its weaknesses. Then, an idea sparked in Kell's mind. He called for the Empire's intelligence division to be brought in. If their enemies had been observing them, then the Empire needed to do the same. They would need to gather information from every corner of the galaxy, listen to every whisper, and study every piece of data they could find. They couldn't let their enemies control the flow of the battle any longer. Meanwhile, the mysterious energy source was still a looming threat. The idea that such a powerful force existed, one that could overpower the Empire's most advanced systems, was a constant worry. If it was true that the enemy was tapping into something beyond the Empire's understanding, then they had to act fast before their advantage turned into a full-scale invasion. General Kell had to make a choice. Should they prepare for a direct confrontation and risk being outmatched again, or should they play the enemy's game and attempt to outsmart them? There was no guarantee that the Empire's usual methods would work this time. They had to think outside the box, move carefully, and most importantly, act quickly. As the meeting ended and his officers left to carry out their orders, Kel couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The enemy was closing in, and the true nature of their strength was still hidden from view. Every step forward felt like stepping into the unknown. The Empire had always been the hunter, the one that dictated the terms of battle. But now, for the first time in history, they were the prey. The question remained, how would they fight back against an enemy who seemed to be preparing for a war the likes of which the galaxy had never seen before? The Empire's fleet had regrouped, but there was an unsettling sense of uncertainty in the air. General Kale stood on the command deck, watching as his officers worked quickly to assess their next steps. They had learned a lot since the initial attack, but the knowledge only seemed to make the situation more confusing. Their enemies were elusive, and every move the Empire made seemed to be predicted by the unknown force. The enemy had not made another major strike, yet their presence loomed large. The fleet was still in disarray, struggling to regain the upper hand. The Empire had always been prepared for anything, except this. General Kale knew they needed to find a solution fast, or they risked losing more than just their ships. The very heart of the Empire was at stake. His eyes flickered to a new report on his screen. It was a message from Commander Lyra, who had been working tirelessly to uncover more about the mysterious energy source the enemy was using. The message was brief but unsettling. "We've made a breakthrough. The energy they're using doesn't just power their technology. It seems to be alive. It's evolving." Kale felt a chill run down his spine. Alive? This new piece of information raised more questions than answers. How could energy evolve? Was it some kind of living organism, or was it a new form of technology that the Empire had never encountered before? The idea that their enemy was using something so unpredictable and dangerous was more than troubling. It made everything else seem trivial. As Kale pondered this, an officer entered the command deck. "General, we've received new intel. The enemy is on the move. They're positioning their fleet near the outskirts of the system, but they're still holding back their main force." This was it. This was the moment the Empire had been waiting for. The enemy had been cautious, testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses. But now it seemed that the time for games was over. The main fleet was finally preparing to make its move. General Kale stood tall, his voice firm. "Prepare the fleet. This is the moment we've been preparing for. We know they're coming, and we need to be ready. We won't let them catch us off guard again." The officers quickly scattered, each taking their positions as the fleet began to position itself for the inevitable confrontation. The tension was thick, palpable, as every officer knew that the next few hours could determine the fate of the entire Empire. It was a delicate balance. Too aggressive, and they might fall into the trap the enemy had set. Too cautious, and they risked being overwhelmed. "Keep your eyes on the communications," Kale instructed his officers. "Any sign of their main fleet, we need to know. We can't afford another surprise." As the Empire's ships slowly moved into their defensive formations, the realization hit General Kale. They were not just fighting to win a battle. They were fighting for their survival. The fate of the galaxy could hinge on what happened next. And then, just as the last of the Empire's fleet ships took its position, a new signal came through the communication channels. It was a message from the enemy, encrypted and clear. This time, the voice wasn't calm or cryptic. It was direct. "You are too late, General. The battle has already been decided. Prepare yourselves." Cal's eyes narrowed. He didn't know if the message was a psychological tactic or a real threat, but he couldn't take chances. The enemy was ready. But what did that mean for the Empire? He looked at his fleet. They were prepared, but the weight of uncertainty still hung over them. Could their strategy stand up to the unknown enemy's power? Could they truly fight against something that seemed to anticipate every move they made? The main fleet was coming. The final confrontation was at hand, and General Kale knew that everything they had worked for, everything they had built, could come crashing down in a single moment. The stakes had never been higher, and for the first time, the future of the Empire felt fragile. The Empire's strength had always been its certainty, its power, but now, with their enemy showing no fear and no hesitation, General Kale understood that certainty had been replaced with doubt. Every decision, every move, would be critical. This battle could change everything. It was time to face the enemy head-on. But Kale couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater than anyone in the Empire could have imagined. The silence before the storm was almost unbearable. The Empire's fleet sat poised in the darkness of space, waiting for the first signs of movement from the enemy. General Kale stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the endless void. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every decision made now could tip the scales in either direction. He knew the battle was inevitable, but there was something about the waiting that felt worse than the battle itself. The officers around him were tense, their faces drawn with worry. But there was a sense of unity, too. They had been through countless conflicts. But this one felt different. The unknown enemy had played their cards expertly, staying just out of reach, while the Empire tried to understand them. Now, the time had come for the final confrontation, and the stakes couldn't be higher. "General, the enemy fleet is emerging." Lieutenant Zora's voice broke through the tension. "They're gathering in a formation. It looks like they're preparing for something big." Cal's heart skipped a beat. This was it. "Any signs of the energy we detected earlier?" he asked. Zora nodded. "Yes, sir. We're seeing irregular energy patterns. It's the same signature, but it's growing stronger. They're preparing their technology, and it looks like they're about to make their move." Kale turned to face the holographic map in the center of the room, watching as the enemy fleet came into view. They moved with precision, almost as if they had practiced this exact moment 1,000 times. But it wasn't just the enemy's formation that had Cal's attention. It was the way they seemed to control the flow of the battle without even having to engage directly. The Empire's fleet, so accustomed to dominating the space around them, felt oddly vulnerable under the watchful eyes of this unknown force. "We've been waiting for this moment," Kale said quietly, almost to himself. "We can't hold back anymore." The crew around him nodded, understanding that the next few minutes would decide everything. They were no longer just defending. They were taking a stand. The Empire would either rise victorious or fall before a threat they hadn't fully understood. "Deploy the fleet," Kale ordered. "We can't let them take the initiative. Prepare all ships for direct engagement." The Empire's warships moved into position, their enormous hulls gleaming in the dim light of the distant stars. The command deck hummed with the activity of officers preparing weapons and calculating trajectories. It was the calm before the chaos, but Kale could feel his pulse quickening. He knew their tactics would need to be flawless. They could not afford another mistake. Then, as if on cue, the enemy fleet made their first move. Ships that had once been cloaked in secrecy now came into view, appearing from the shadows of space like predators emerging from the dark. The Empire's sensors buzzed with activity, trying desperately to keep up with the sudden influx of data. But no matter how fast the readings came in, it was clear that the unknown fleet had the upper hand. The Empire's advantage in numbers meant little against an enemy that could strike and vanish without warning. General Kale clenched his fists. The attack had begun, but the enemy wasn't fighting the way they had expected. Instead of a massive wave of firepower, the enemy ships scattered, moving in unpredictable patterns. They didn't try to overwhelm the Empire's fleet all at once. Instead, they worked in small, calculated bursts, forcing the Empire to divide its forces in response. "This isn't a battle," Kale muttered. "It's a puzzle." The officers on the command deck exchanged nervous glances. They were used to fighting opponents who came at them head-on, giving them a chance to fight back with their superior numbers and firepower. But this was different. The enemy was controlling the tempo, forcing the Empire into a defensive position where every move was dictated by their opponent's actions. "General, "We're being flanked," one of the officers reported. "We're losing control of the outer sectors." Cal's mind raced. The enemy was outsmarting them, forcing them to spread themselves too thin. If they couldn't regain the initiative soon, they would be overwhelmed. "Reroute our forces, reinforce the outer sectors, and form a defensive line," he ordered, but deep down, he knew that it wasn't enough. They were reacting, not acting. And in this war, that was a dangerous place to be. As the Empire's fleet struggled to hold its ground, Cal's mind turned back to the energy signature they had discovered earlier. The enemy's ability to control space in such a way seemed to have something to do with that mysterious energy. If they couldn't understand it, they would never be able to fight back effectively. But even as he formulated plans to gather more information, a sense of dread settled over him. The Empire had always been the predator. Now, they were the prey, and they didn't even know how to defend themselves. The next few hours were a blur of calculations, reports, and shifting strategies. The Empire's fleet was slowly regaining some ground, but the enemy's tactics were too refined, too well planned. Cal could feel the pressure building. The Empire was no longer just fighting for victory. They were fighting for survival. And somewhere deep within him, Cal knew the true battle was yet to come. The enemy wasn't simply trying to destroy the Empire. They were trying to rewrite the rules of war. If they succeeded, everything the Empire had built would be in jeopardy. The battle had shifted, and the Empire was starting to feel the weight of the unknown enemy strategies. General Cal stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the shimmering holographic map of the battlefield. The once proud fleet, so accustomed to overwhelming force and victory, now seemed like a scattered collection of ships struggling to keep up with an adversary that seemed to understand their every move. "Sir, we've lost contact with the fleet on the far side of the system," Lieutenant Zara reported, her voice tense. "It's like they've just vanished." Cal didn't need to ask for further details. He had seen the signs before. The enemy wasn't just fighting with advanced technology. They were fighting with knowledge, with foresight, and with a level of intelligence that the Empire couldn't match. Their ability to manipulate the flow of battle made them unpredictable and dangerous. It was as though they had already mapped out every possible outcome and had prepared for each one. The problem, however, was the growing sense that the Empire was always playing catch-up. Every tactical maneuver, every counterattack, seemed to be anticipated by the enemy. The unknown energy that powered their fleet was part of the puzzle, but it wasn't enough to explain how the enemy was always one step ahead. There was something more, a deeper understanding of the battlefield that the Empire couldn't crack. "We need more information," Cal muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We can't keep reacting like this." Zara's fingers flew over her console as she pulled up the latest intelligence reports. "We've detected more strange energy signatures, sir. They're not just cloaking ships. There's something else happening. It's like they're manipulating the space around them." "Manipulating space," Cal repeated, his eyes narrowing. This was something new. If the enemy could manipulate space itself, they weren't just fighting with advanced technology. They were using forces beyond anything the Empire had encountered. "Sir," another officer spoke up, his voice hesitant. "We've also noticed something strange about the enemy's communications. They're not using traditional signals. It's as if they're communicating through patterns, through the very fabric of space. It's like they're bypassing our entire network." Cal's mind raced. If the enemy could communicate in a way that bypassed all of the Empire's defenses, they would be impossible to predict. It was no longer a question of defeating them with firepower or strategy. It was about understanding a completely new form of warfare, one that the Empire had no tools to counter. He looked around at his officers. There was a grim determination in their eyes, but also a hint of uncertainty. They had trained for years to handle conventional enemies, to anticipate their moves, but now they were facing something that didn't play by any rules they knew. "We need to adapt," Cal said finally, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his chest. We need to find a way to tap into the same kind of understanding they have of this battlefield. If we can do that, we can begin to fight on equal terms." The officers around him exchanged looks. They understood what this meant. This was no longer just about brute force or even advanced tactics. It was about evolving, about finding a way to fight an enemy who seemed to exist in a space where logic and predictability no longer applied. As the fleet continued to struggle against the enemy's unpredictable moves, Cale knew that the path forward would not be easy. They would need to rethink everything they had learned about warfare. The rules of engagement had changed, and if they were to have any hope of survival, they would need to understand the very nature of the threat they were facing. General Cale turned to his officers, his voice unwavering. "This is no longer a battle we can fight with just tactics. We need to understand our enemy in a way we never have before. We need to find their weaknesses, their blind spots, and we need to do it fast." As the officers worked to implement his new orders, Cale's mind remained focused on one question: who were these enemies, and what was their ultimate goal? The unknown energy, their strange communications, their ability to control the flow of battle. These were all pieces of a puzzle that Cale had to solve before the Empire could hope to prevail. It was clear now that this wasn't just about winning a war. It was about redefining everything the Empire had ever known about conflict. The journey ahead would not be easy, but Cale knew one thing: the Empire would not fall without a fight.